Good morning, welcome to the Colton Vineyard, and happy Mother's Day. In the history of the Vineyard, on Mother's Day, a lot of great things happened in the church a long time ago, and it helped birth the movement as we know it today. That would be an interesting study someday if we look at it. But as we come to today, I want to honor the mothers today. I want to talk about a very famous mom in the Bible, and that was Hannah. Hannah led an incredible life, but more assuredly, her child that was born really brought a big change in the history of Israel. Up to this time, Israel was run by judges. And when Samuel came along, it was a little bit different. He led it more as a prophet, and there were times of change, and God did some incredible things. But the story behind the story is how Samuel came about. Samuel's father had two wives, and Hannah was really looked down upon, and besides being a social outcast because she was barren and probably a lot of ridicule, and the old gossip probably really carried on there. But Hannah decided to follow God and seek God and say, God, I want to do what you want me to do. And so she sought God very intensely in prayer. It was a struggle in prayer. And as she was seeking God, the high priest said, hey, lady, why do you come here drunk and intoxicated? And she affirmed herself by saying, no, I'm not drunk. I'm not intoxicated. I'm seeking God because of deep despair in my life. And Eli, the high priest, released the word that may have been the point of contact she was looking for. He said, may God grant you the petition of your prayer. Well, shortly after that, Hannah became pregnant with Samuel. Samuel was born, and she dedicated him to the ministry. That at the age of around 3, she took him to the temple, and that's where he lived for the rest of his life in terms of following God and meeting the spiritual demands that were upon him. But it was a time of change in the history of Israel. So we see a couple of things here. We see God's timing in terms of it was God's will, it was God's time, no more judges, and they're stepping into a time of the kings and the prophets. So this was happening. But at the same time, from Hannah's perspective, it was, I'm a social outcast. I'm really looked down upon. And so in her life, instead of becoming bitter and perhaps upset and in deep despair, she began to seek God, and God honored her request. So it was a combination of what God did inside of her as well as what God was doing in the history of Israel. So her time of deep despair turned into a blessing for the nation of Israel because Samuel was born, one of the greatest leaders that they ever had. So sometimes in our own personal life, we can get so nearsighted that we don't really understand the big picture of what God is doing. But in our own personal lives, we think, oh, I failed, or I made a mistake, or I'm living in sin. And if you are, obviously, the antidote to that is just to begin to follow God. But on the other hand, maybe like Hannah, it was a time of deepening our faith, our prayer life becoming more intense, seeking God, because God is preparing and working the future out ahead of us in such a way that we would not dream possible. So God did this with Hannah in preparation for the next life for Samuel to come and begin to make a big impact in the history of Israel. So sometimes in our life, perhaps maybe an intense moment, a time of difficulty, as some would perceive, is really a time of prayer and a time of seeking God and a time of becoming more familiar with God, as God empowers us and God grows our faith as we walk with God, so that as we change, so that to handle the next challenge that comes in our life. This may be what God is doing in our life. And of course, today when we look at parenting, we never know sometimes how God is going to use the children in our midst. We never know what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years from now. When children are small, we tend to struggle sometimes as parents. We tend to say, what do I do? But mothers always hang in there, and they do a great job, and they do a good job. And just like educators, sometimes the kid in our class, we thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this kid? And lo and behold, tomorrow, the next decade, years later, he becomes a person of great influence. We never realize what's going to happen. I think about little baby Moses as his mother let him go down in the river in a little small ark, and we think, wow, what mother would do something like that? But somehow that saved him, and as it saved him, he began to be raised in Pharaoh's court. But at the same time, Moses again becomes one of the greatest leaders that Israel has ever had. So sometimes we don't really know what's going to happen in that process. But what we do know is if we devote our lives to prayer and seeking God, God will begin to bring change, and God will be preparing us for the challenges that may be coming tomorrow. The Bible talks about God being able to answer our prayers infinitely beyond what we could imagine or even dare dream possible. That's the God we're talking about. Now, I don't think Hannah realized that someday her son was going to be a prophet for the nation of Israel and to bring change, and that he was a man of great respect, a man of integrity, a man of his word. But that's what happened. She may not have realized that, but that's the result that came about. So preparing our hearts today for something that may be happening tomorrow is a big challenge of faith for us today. And we want to bless all the mothers for their love and devotion, for motherhood, for children, for all that they've done. But at the same time, we want to pray that we too develop this intense prayer life where we're seeking God regardless of circumstance, understanding that God needs to work in our lives. And as God works in our lives, we prepare for the future, what he may be doing down the road tomorrow, or the people that we influence who may make an effect on the people down the road tomorrow. So God bless you. My prayer for you today is, moms, thank you for your love and devotion, the sacrifice you put in for your children, for the family. But also, my prayer is that we would become people of deep prayer, people that would seek God even during the intense times, so that as a result, God can continue to do the great works that he has planned for our lives, even though today we may not be able to fathom all that he can do in our lives. So God bless you. Have faith in God and trust God always.